Hi friends and subscribers to this YouTube channel. My name is Pastor Peter, the executive music and video producer at Heavenly Praise Media. I'm also a passionate worship leader and a worship pastor, a choir master and a songwriter. God has graciously and generously gifted me in the area of music, and therefore I always feel it important to share some of the things that I've learned over the years as I've been training the teams, both church choirs and praise and worship teams. In this channel, I have been sharing inspirational messages through short videos. I've also been sharing music videos that I have produced in my studio, and then tutorials. Today's video is a tutorial, and I am going to be sharing something on the area of praise and worship. Having been a praise and worship leader and a worship pastor, I have learned a few things, and I believe it's time that I begin to share some of these things because I believe there are things that you can learn from that. In today's video, I'll be sharing about the 10 reasons why most praise and worship teams are failing today. You know, over the years, I have discovered a few areas that our praise and worship teams struggle with. And therefore, I think this tutorial will be important for you because number one, you're going to discover the loopholes and the weaknesses that your team is struggling with. And it is at that point, when you discover the point that you need to improve, that you begin to work out. Discovering the areas of weakness is not just enough, but we need to begin to work out these problems and these struggles so that we may excel and continue to keep on growing in the worship ministry. You know, it's about keeping on growing. Excellence is not a one-day event. We encourage your teams to keep on growing, to keep on embracing change, to keep on working on your weaknesses so that we can excel. And now, reason number one as to why our worship teams are failing is lack of understanding of the theology of worship. You know, most teams today do not understand the meaning of authentic worship. Most worship leaders do not understand the forms and functions of worship, and therefore it's important that we begin to understand God's way of worship as opposed to our way of worship. We need to begin to understand why in the first place we should worship and how we should worship, because until we get to that point where we can understand God's way of worship, then we may not worship in spirit and in truth as He says in His word. So lack of the understanding of the theology of worship is one of the reasons why our teams are failing today. The second reason as to why our teams are failing today is a poor integration of worship and culture. There are very important questions that we need to ask ourselves. We live in a culture, and therefore, if we live in a culture, we need to understand how we can worship God in this culture. How does worship relate with our culture? How is worship in culture but not of culture? Those are very important questions that we need to ask ourselves. How do we integrate the two in such a way, in such a manner that there will be no conflict, such that our culture is respected and God is worshipped the way He should be worshipped? This is an area that most praise and worship teams are struggling today. The third area that I think our teams are struggling with is lack of a calling to the worship ministry. You know, worship ministry is not just a ministry where you just dive in because you're enjoying being there, because your friends are there, because you find yourself there, because no one else can do that where you are. There are important questions you need to ask. How do I know that I am called to serve in the worship ministry? How do I grow in that area of worship leading or worship ministry? Because we need to keep on growing in that area. You also need to ask yourself, how do I become the worship leader the Lord is seeking? The fourth thing that I think our teams are struggling with is lack of resources. Our teams lack resources, and our teams are struggling really. And one of the areas that our teams are struggling with is having not enough committed and talented musicians. In most churches, we have no pianists who are talented enough or even committed. We have no committed worship leaders. Even those that are there, the few that are there in some of these churches are too proud and I believe you can attest to that. There's no quality musical equipment that can produce the good sound that can encourage you as you do your ministry. Even the musicians that are there as well are also involved in other ministries. You find that you need them, but they say, I'm going to this gig, I'm rehearsing for this concert. And sometimes, well, we understand, but this is an area that our teams are struggling with. There are no resources, and we need to pray to God that He gives us these resources. Number 5, reason why we are struggling today as praise and worship teams is lack of time. Time is always available, but it's how we create and how we utilize the time that we have. Most teams struggle with creating time to practice. They struggle to create time to pray for the ministry. They struggle to create time to study God's word, and especially on the area of worship, most teams struggle to search and learn new songs. So lack of creating good time for these things is a challenge that most teams are struggling with today. Number 6, the challenge that I think also our teams are struggling with is lack of commitment. There is no commitment for most members of worship and even worship leaders today. There is no commitment to develop and to serve. There is no commitment to practice and even keep time. The short time that our teams have been allocated in a week, we don't utilize it well. There's no commitment to do this, and therefore, because of this, our teams are really struggling. The 7th reason why I think our teams are failing today is lack of songs that edify. Most songs that are sung in churches today just entertain, they do not edify. They are there to just entertain the congregation. Some of these songs do not even address the real life challenges, the real life issues today, because when you don't address the real life challenges, you don't connect with your congregation, you don't connect with your audience. Some of these songs, they're just there to make the worship leader feel good about leading them. They are there to make the musicians feel good when they play them. Some of these songs contain just the wrong theology of worship, and therefore we need to watch over that. We need to look for songs that edify. We need to look for songs that address the real issues of life and even the real way of worshiping God. The 8th reason why I think our teams are struggling is church leadership and congregational issues. Most church leaders and congregations today have been a big hindrance to the worship ministry. Some of the leaders do not support the praise and worship teams at all. Some of the worship teams have been neglected. They have been left on their own. Some of the church leaders want performance, but they do not contribute towards that performance. They don't care about the struggles that you go through when you rehearse these songs. They don't care about the late hours you go home after practices. They just need performance. There's also negative criticism from members of the congregation. Some of the members of the congregation today do not appreciate anything. They don't care anything about you guys, and therefore that has been a major challenge. There is also little or no mutual financial appreciation for our worship leaders. There is no appreciation and respect for our volunteer musicians. They're not well respected, they're not well compensated, they're not well appreciated, and therefore this becomes a big hindrance to the worship ministry. The 9th reason why I think our teams are struggling today is lack of a good sound team. A sound team is very important for the worship teams. Most worship teams lack soundmen with a considerable technical knowledge on sound. In other churches, there ain't even soundmen. You are just left to work out on your own. Or however you will do it, we just need performance this Sunday. In some churches, those soundmen that are available are not even willing to be trained. They think they know it all. They think whatever they know is what is authentic. In some other churches, the soundmen available can't even understand what the musicians want. You find there will always be a struggle between the musicians and the soundmen, because there's what the musicians want to hear and there's also what the soundmen want to hear, and therefore a source of a major conflict. So lack of a good sound team in our churches is one of the major reasons why our teams are not succeeding. And the last reason is lack of proper vocal training. In most cases, there is no serious vocal training in our churches today for our praise and worship teams, and therefore you will find lots of off tunes and lots of off beats from either the worship leaders or even the backing vocalists. And therefore, because of lack of proper vocal training, you find that our vocal ranges are very limited. There's poor vocal techniques. There is also poor microphone techniques. We experience some of these challenges because we have not been trained. Some of these teams have not been trained on how to handle their microphones. Some of these teams have not been trained on how to sing with the correct vocal techniques. And therefore, those are the areas that I think we need to work on. That's all for today, and thank you for following through. Of course, the list is not exhaustive, and therefore coming soon on this channel is the second part of the reasons why most praise and worship teams are failing today, and a few more other topics that I'll be handling, as you can see on your screen. And please subscribe to my channel for more of this, and let's keep praying that the Lord shapes our praise and worship teams as we continue to work on the areas that we need to work on. Thank you for your time, and may God bless you.